Would all please stand for the invocation of the flag. Lord, thank you for giving us this beautiful day and bringing us all together to do the business of the citizens of Canby. Help us all get home safely tonight and make wise decisions for the citizens of Canby. In your name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. First thing we'll do is I will ask for citizen input. Are you a citizen or are you here in your official capacity? Or?
I'll be official.
In a minute, okay. So citizen input on non-agenda items. Okay, there's none of that going on. There are no minutes to review. Brian says that there is no new business. So we will move directly into the public hearing phase of this. Okay. So the matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please fill out the public testimony card and give it to the recording secretary. At the appropriate time, when your name is called, please step forward to the microphone, state your name, address, and interest in the matter. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have about 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will have 5 minutes each. The opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes up for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. So the first matter before us is an annexation, and the city staff is requesting to annex all remaining portions of Southeast Township Road public right-of-way, ROW, including the portion of right-of-way that crosses Union Pacific Railroad crossing DOT 760205P MP 748.30. The public ROW subject to this annexation is located between the western boundary of the Malala Forest Road and the western boundary of Malino Road, ANN 18-06 Southeast Township Road annexation. So at this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate or abstain from hearing the present matter. Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have a staff report, then questions by the hearing body. Then we will open public hearing for testimony. Applicant not more than 15 minutes. Proponents not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral not more than 5 minutes each. And the rebuttal by the applicant not more than 10 minutes. At that time, we'll close public testimony. We'll ask a few more questions. Then we will have discussion and deliberation by the hearing body, and there will be no additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Any questions? Okay. So we will go to, I guess it's not Brian since he's not sitting in the chair. So would that be you, Sandy?
That would be me.
Okay, Sandy.
Thank you.
You're up.
All right. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. No? Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, Sandy Freund with the City of Canby Planning Division. And this is a request by the city to annex Southeast Township Road, a public right-of-way, into the city's jurisdiction, and the total area of annexation is 2.32 acres. Before we go into this a little bit, on page 4 of your staff report is a typo, and I just want to clear that up for the record. It's in the last paragraph under Roman numeral 2. And the word 3 should say 4, F-O-U-R, of the 4 annexations rather than 3 annexations. Okay. Oh, thanks. So the portion of the right-of-way to be annexed is located between the western boundary of Malala Forest Road and the western boundary of Mulino Road, and includes one railroad crossing, which is highlighted with the yellow oblong circle and the hash marks in there, along Southeast Township Road. And it also includes the railroad crossing, Union Pacific Railroad crossing, which is currently leased, that portion of it, by Oregon Pacific Railroad. Union Pacific is the owner of the railroad, however. Over the last 3 decades, there have been 4 annexations along Southeast Township Road of developable property. However, only one of those 4 included right-of-way into the city of Canby's jurisdiction. This annexation request is to bring the remaining portions of Township Road right-of-way into the city's jurisdiction, and by doing so, permitting for development projects and maintenance responsibilities will be clear for the public and developers alike, and provide better customer service overall. And I'll go back to the previous slide in a moment. The applicable criteria used in evaluating this annexation are listed on page 5 of the staff report. And because this annexation does not include developable property, it was limited to 3 applicable criteria. All non-applicable criteria are listed on pages 6 through 7 of your packet. Staff did receive 1 phone inquiry about the annexation from Mr. Brink, and he lives on tax lot, what is it? 3,000, I believe. It's the little one. Excuse me, I'll point to it.
I see it, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's right in here. And he had some questions about the annexation and potentially affecting his property or not. So staff responded to his questions. In the staff report, you can find them on page 7, and it goes into each of his questions and staff response. And then based on the facts, findings, and conclusions of the staff report, staff does recommend the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of the annexation, file case number ANN 18-06. And this was also noticed for the City Council for August 7th public hearing date, if it should move forward accordingly. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm open for any questions you might have at this time.
Okay. Any questions?
Just, I guess to make sure I have a clear understanding, it looks to me like you're providing an annexation that stitches together and makes everything contiguous in this area.
That's correct.
So,
Yes. The previous ones
Yeah.
omitted this component except for one of
Right.
the annexations, and so this just is a technical cleanup.
the report was very clear on that, but sometimes I'm not always so clear, so I wanted to make sure that I
understand.
stated that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. So we'll hear from the applicant.
It's the city.
Okay, all righty. So, a proponent, any proponents? Any opponents? Any neutral parties that want to be heard on this matter? Okay. So, all righty. Then we will close the public hearing for testimony. Any questions for anybody that we have here? Okay. Any discussion? Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve the city's request for an annexation for the remaining portions of Southeast Township Road public right-of-way, including the portion ROW that crosses Union Pacific Railroad, crossing DOT 760205P and MP 748.30.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve annexation 18-06 Southeast Township Road annexation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, good enough. And now, it has been requested that we have a 5-minute break to arrange some stuff. People. We're going to arrange people. Okay, city staff is requesting consideration of a legislative text amendment to streamline, clarify, and update numerous sections of the Canby Land Development and Planning Ordinance titled 16 Canby Municipal Code. The text amendment proposal edits and updates 32 chapters and the table of contents from Title 16 of the Canby Municipal Code, and also amends one specific provision of the Canby Comprehensive Plan to delete Area K of Policy Number 6 under Finding Number 1 of the Buildable Lands Section TA/CPA 19-01 Development and Planning Ordinance Title 16 CMC and Canby Comprehensive Plan Area K. Tonight, there is one matter before the hearing body that requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on these matters, please fill out a comment card and give to the recording secretary. When your name is called, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and interest in the matter. Those people that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please indicate your desire to speak by raising your hands at this time. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. All questions must be directed through the Planning Commission chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. All written testimony received both for and against shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. The public hearing shall be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, then any questions from the hearing body. I will then open the hearing to public testimony. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes. And then at that time, I'll close the public hearing for testimony and any questions from the hearing body, then discussion. A hearing decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing on each matter, or it will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Any questions? Okay. Brian.
All right, thank you, Chair. This is a continuation of our public hearing that we held at the last meeting. And the focus tonight, at least my part, was to take a 4-page submittal that we had at the very first public hearing and to try to address the concerns that were raised in that memorandum that we received. And so I've prepared a supplemental memorandum that is the focus of tonight's meeting to try to address the basically 4 different topics that were raised of concern. And I'll just start with the first one. And it regarded townhouse dwellings with common wall construction. Some of the concerns voiced was a need to require an alley or a other sidewalk type connection at the rear of these common walled townhomes, recognizing the fact that when you have 2 or more connected, you have a middle unit or several middle units that don't have any means of exiting the rear yard if there isn't an alley or a common easement for a sidewalk in the back. And the concern was in emergency situations, the impact that could have on either responders or actually the residents that live in those units. Really requiring them to go through the front door, over the roof, or climb over the fences in an emergency situation to get to those backyards or to escape from the backyards. My response in the memorandum was to try to make it clear that staff is very supportive of townhomes that would be accessible by rear alleys. We think that's the preferred layout if they're going to be constructed in Canby. But there is a but to that. And the only way that we see, and our goal or objective is to help assure that the townhome is a viable housing type in Canby and encourage its construction within the community. And if we require absolute requirement for rear alleys, or possibly even the alternative with a public sidewalk easement at the back, then we present some problems in terms of properties that are likely to propose townhomes not having the option for an alley. And so what we've indicated in the staff report is that in those situations where we can plan ahead in the design of the block links and the circulation patterns in a planned out area, which you could have with our annexation concept plans, or you could have through planned unit developments, which are usually larger areas planned out in a master planned way, you could get to the option, at least, if not even full out requiring, that when a townhome is proposed, it shall be utilize a rear alley as a means of access. And we think that would be great in those situations where we can plan ahead for that option to fit so that they can actually construct. Usually those rear means of access are private when used for townhomes. They wouldn't necessarily have to be. They could be a public street. In the downtown area here in Canby, our alleys are public streets. But usually in a townhome situation, they are private. So they become maintained by the adjacent lot owners, part of the homeowners association. One of the examples is our annexation concept plan we adopted for North Redwood Landing. It specifically had many pages and illustrations of the possibility of townhomes in the R1.5 zoned area of that concept plan. And they made them so that an alley could be chosen mid-block in the circulation pattern that they had. Unfortunately, it wasn't a requirement that they do that, but it provided that option very clearly, that the developer, whoever bought the lot and decided to develop, could make that choice. The developer that moved forward chose the detached single-family homes, a more conventional style, and chose not to do the alleys. And so that's where we're proposing some change to our wording to strengthen and make it clearer that our preference is to have alleys, and that in situations where we have a master planned subdivision or it's part of a master planned area where thought went into providing the option for alleys, that they are required to use alleys. And then on the other hand, recognizing that the townhomes that have currently in the past been built in Canby, none of them have used an alley in the rear, and we have several examples in town. And recognizing that currently staff has no knowledge of any building code requirements or fire life safety, the National Fire Code requiring that those middle units are not, at least from their thoughts in how they adopt the codes, providing at least the minimal need for public safety and such. And recognizing that since all of the current townhomes that have been constructed have been in infill situations where there's redevelopment occurring, no amount of money is going to allow them to build an alley. It won't go anywhere. It'll just dead end behind the units. There's no way to get it out to a public street. And so we feel like that if we make that strict standard our preferred to utilize alleys, there won't be new townhome developments occurring unless it's in one of these master planned areas. And if we have those coming forward, then I think we should require the alleys. And staff looks at it as a emergency safety issue, but more so as a preferable design feature, because you have a public sidewalk along your public street that doesn't have driveways coming out, gives you that traditional new urbanism feel in an urban setting, with the front porches and a communication between the front doors and the sidewalk and the pedestrians. It's more pedestrian friendly, makes the front of the townhomes more attractive, and your access is to the rear. Usually your trash pickup is to the rear, and works out really great when you're able to provide those alleys. So that's our reasoning still, and so we did propose some new wording. And I might mention that we actually reprinted out with unique page numbers for the entire 426 pages. And unfortunately, that changed the pages that this refers to. But I think I can find it in here. I think this is the first one. So I don't know if you can get to it or if you need to or not, but on page 42, under the R1.5 zone of this packet, is where it starts with the changes proposed for the wording for townhomes. And I think it's actually not until we get to page 46 where we've made the change in the code language. So I'm going to read that new wording, see how that sounds to you. Under other regulations here, townhouse, common wall, development shall not exceed 3 dwelling units as defined in Chapter 1604.195. This is in the R1.5 zone. Townhouse development consisting of 3 or more side-by-side attached units for which a garage is included shall provide vehicle access from a public or private rear alley when said alley already exists, or when rear alley service was planned as a viable design alternative as part of an adopted annexation development concept plan, planned unit development, or other master planned area. Our objective was to make it straightforward required language. And so we've kind of done that by that statement. Then we indicate infill development sites proposed for townhouses which cannot feasibly accommodate an alley to provide for rear alley access shall be permitted to exclude this requirement. Where 3 or fewer townhouses with front-loaded garages and driveways are proposed, it shall be permissible to back out directly into the public right-of-way only if that right-of-way is classified as a local or neighborhood collector street. Otherwise, all access must be able to exit the townhomes moving in a forward direction into the public street. Any grouping of 3 attached townhouses shall be separated by a minimum of 10 feet from the interior side property line to provide a minimum of 20 foot of open space from wall to wall of the next townhome. We added that because it was a bit unclear when we were talking about, at the first hearing, the 10-foot separation that we were going to require between groupings. That separation is from the property line. And so you really end up with 20 foot from wall to wall. And the standard separation is 7 foot from a property line. So without this requirement, it would be 14 feet from wall to wall. And now we're requiring that there be 20 foot. We put the same kind of wording pretty much in the R2 zone. I don't think it's any different. I think it's pretty much the same thing. So that's our proposed changes to the townhome wording to try to address the concerns. So let's go on to the second item. Second item that was raised for concern, and the Planning Commission also had a concern about this through the first public hearing. It's changing the standard review process for partitions, which is currently a type 3 public hearing, to a type 2 planning director decision. And we have now also, in order to bolster and do a change that we think has been needed, we got bolder. We're now proposing to delete the distinction between a major and a minor partition, and providing the right of appeal with adopted $250 appeal fee, which this body discussed, and we were planning to make that change. We looked at other cities, and they weren't all $250, but we found out state statute now requires it to be $250 and no more when you're appealing a planning director or a staff decision. You are not allowed to have a charge any greater than $250.
Does it allow us to charge less?
I'm sure you could, yeah. And there are cities that have no charge. Even I saw something in the Portland paper the other day that all neighborhood associations are allowed a no-charge appeal when they oppose a development occurring in their neighborhood. So we've adopted this in our new fee schedule, and it was effective July 1st. That's been published, and so that is what the fee now is. Came down from $1,900 and some dollars to $250 to follow the state statute maximum allowed.
Why did you guys choose the maximum allowed?
Because it seems like that's what everyone is doing pretty much. They're following the statute provision, recognizing there's still a lot of work involved when appeals happen. That's why we had the original fee what it was, to help cover staff costs and time to do appeals. So the primary concern was that you're removing that option, or the perceived option for citizen input. Well, we're not doing that, but we are removing the option of that being at a public hearing. And that's partly related to the reason we feel like it's suitable to be at a staff level, is that the statute clearly indicates that partitions are a kind of limited land use decision that must be approved by clear and objective standards. And when you're using clear and objective criteria, then generally you either meet the standards or you don't. And we are your professional staff that you've hired to try to make those determinations. And there's very little room for discretion. I do recall, and I'm sure some of you were here, we've had some discussions about should we require a sidewalk at this location or not? In situations where there's no other sidewalks on the street, but hey, they're doing a partition now, and technically you should require them to start the sidewalk. And so we've had instances where you've required it and instances where you took discretion and said it doesn't make any sense, so we're not going to.
Can I, Mr. Chair, do you mind if I ask a question? I don't want to be out of order here. Do you mind, Brian?
Yep, not at all.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't we discussing about 2 months ago, and I don't have my notes in front of me, that we were going to change it to where if there was an argument,
Yes.
you were going to kick it right to us? So
and
that's been changed again.
Yeah, it's been changed again, and so the wording that you'll see, the new wording that's in the back now that actually eliminates the distinction between major and minor, and we're still proposing that it be a staff direction. And so staff feels strong enough about this provision at this time that we didn't make a change that we discussed by the council. And kind of recognizing that you are making a recommendation. We're going to keep making this recommendation up to the council level, but they're going to have what your recommendation is from this final hearing, hopefully, the final hearing.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I
No,
just want to make sure
not at
I
all.
know what
But
we're
that's
talking
right.
about when we're...
We certainly discussed that, and I don't know if that language is crossed out now in here, or whether we
What page are you
deleted
on?
it. So let me find that page in here. It says what section, 1660 is the section. So long.
Page 56?
Looks
No,
like
it's-
you found it quicker than I did. Yeah. So, you know, on 55 up in the section headings, you'll see that we just marked through minor and major and just put the word partitions. And just to remind you again, the difference between the two is simply a statement that a major involves a private road of some sort, and a minor doesn't. So all minor partitions are along and all lots front on a public street, whereas it's a potential currently with a major partition that in almost all instances you would be doing 3 lots rather than 2, and one of them would be a flag, or 1 or 2 of them could be a flag lot. And to get to that house behind the house, the flag lot arrangement, you'd have to have a private access easement or drive that went by 1 or 2 lots to get to that lot that doesn't have frontage on the public street.
So Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm mishearing this, but I'm getting a sense that if this is left as a staff decision and these minor petitions or major petitions would not come before this body, and therefore there would be less opportunity for the public, people that are actually affected by this decision, to have their voice heard. Would that be correct?
I don't know whether I would classify it that way. There'd be a different opportunity. They could still call us, they could email us, they could provide written comments, because we still send out notice, and staff prepares a report that's going to look basically the same as the report we would prepare for a public hearing, and we would try to respond to their concerns in our staff decision report. And if they didn't like what the decision was, then at $250, which isn't tremendously, difficult, they can appeal, and it'd be in front of you.
So prior to this, there would have been no $250 because we would have heard it. So
That's right.
This is
It's an additional-
essentially a new tax,
Well, it's
essentially a new charge for citizens that want to come in
right,
here.
but it's the standard process, and staff feels very uneasy about the proposed language that the Planning Commission had. Oh, when somebody says at the last minute, the day before the decision, that, oh, we really don't like this. So now all of a sudden, the next day, we have to figure out how to get it to the Planning Commission
So-
without a formal process. And that's why we don't like that idea.
So Brian, what would your position be if you left it in place the way it is now, but reduced the fee to $0?
That's up to you. It's completely up to you.
Yeah, I have a question. You still have to do a staff report just like we do right now to go to the council, right?
Well, no, not for a partition.
Or you don't?
No, the partitions stop with you unless appealed, and an appeal of a planning commission decision, that cost has not been changed. It's still like $2,000. So
But
you're the
even
final.
even when we do a planning, when we propose to reject or accept a development, and then it goes to the council,
The only things that go to a council is a rezoning and an annexation. The rest of the subdivisions, design reviews, conditional uses, you're the final approving authority. The
Unless
only,
it's-
yeah,
Okay.
it would be a formal appeal for them to go any further. And so my emphasis again is that partitions, almost every community does them administratively because they're clear and objective standards. It's almost analogous, believe it or not. It's just that Canby has a long history of bringing them to a public hearing. Other communities do not. And it's like bringing a sign permit to the Planning Commission. You either meet this size and the number of signs you're allowed, or you don't. I mean, it's not quite that straightforward, but it's pretty much, that's what clear and objective means.
is the reason you're wanting to change this because it will reduce the labor of the staff mainly, or?
No, it's because we think that it's more similar to other administratively approved things like temporary vendor permits and sign permits. I don't know what else we have that we do administratively.
And just to be clear, we're talking about partitions that would result in no more than 3 lots,
Right,
not subdivisions. That's still,
right. And from history, it's very rare that there's ever a private drive associated with a partition. If it is, it's that case where you've got 3 lots and you have a house behind a house in a flag lot arrangement.
And this would apply to just minor partitions or minor and
We're
major?
proposing now that it apply to partitions, period, and we remove that distinction because we haven't found another community that has that distinction.
Are we just making the change because we want to be like everybody else?
We're making it because we don't think it makes much sense to have the distinction.
I would agree with you, Brian, that when I've worked with, when I develop or provide designs for partitions and subdivisions, almost everyone that I've come across has administrative decisions made by, or the partitions are administratively approved or declined.
There-
So,
and I guess to me, there is value to having provisions that are similar to other municipalities because it generally makes the city easier to work with for everybody if it's not a surprise, oh, Canby's different because of this, unless there's a good reason to be different. And I think what we're bumping up against here is people are trying to understand, why do we need to make the change? Was it better before? Is this better? Are we just changing to be the same? And I guess I would offer that changing to be the same in a way is kind of better.
Yeah, we indicated that the only real difference is that instead of a 20-day notice before a decision's made, now in front of the Planning Commission, it's a 10-day notice. The radius of notice is the same because even though a partition today is considered a type 3 process, for whatever reason, the code gives it a type 2 radius notification in our table. So that's something else that we're looking at, maybe cleaning up at some point. But we're not reducing the radius of the notice because we're reducing it to a type 2. We're keeping it 200 foot, which is what it's always been.
And I don't want to hold you up. I think what my concern starting out on this, and I think some of the other commissioners shared the same concern with Brian, is that we want citizens to be able to come and talk in front of us and bring their issues before us as least restrictively as possible. And while $250 may not be a lot to you or I, it may be a lot to other people. And so that's why I asked about the $0. I don't have a problem with you doing the administrative approvals. I think what I would take issue with is creating a fee structure whereby it would make it more difficult for a citizen to come in here and appeal it. I don't think I would have an issue if it was a $0 appeal fee. So that's why I ask you, would your opinion change?
I would much prefer that over the procedure that you were talking about that wasn't a formal appeal application with no cost.
Well, and I think what you have is creative, and I think that it accomplishes the same goal so long as, in my opinion, so long as that there wouldn't be an appeal fee in place to get in front of, we're a pretty low-level body, to get in front of a low-level body to talk about concerns that citizens may have. I think that that's important.
Yeah.
So,
I don't like it, just flat tell you, because I believe the public we need to hear the public input, and if partitions are so cut and dried, I don't see where the difficulty is. And actually, I was worried about maybe the time constraint on builders, but you're telling me this one will be a 20-day waiting period, and right now it's a 10-day for the commission. I think if we leave the hearings in, you could get rid of the major or minor because both of them would come before us anyway. I am not in favor of the administrative state making all these decisions by themselves when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think we need to let the public vent, because at least they feel like, although a lot of times there's not much we can do about it, at least they can get here in front of a camera and tell us what they do like or what they don't like. That's where I stand on this.
I think I tend to agree with Larry on this, with Commissioner Boatwright. I too believe that the public should have the right to come forward and have their say. And even though this doesn't seem like a big deal, I think that it is, in terms of people feeling connected to their government and feeling like they have a say, that they're a part of something that's going on in their city. I think that putting distance between any level of government and the people is not a particularly good thing. So I'm with you on that. So I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue on.
And that's about all I had on that topic.
Okay.
So if you want to move on to the next topic.
Move on.
All right, so topic 3 was regarding multiple family 15-foot buffer and step-up height provision. So this was actually raised, and there's input attached to this memorandum from Jason Bristol, who I think you all know is a local developer in town. Page 10 through 14 or 15 here, 14. He's indicates why the current requirement to have a 15-foot buffer between a property shown on our, and I've got a slide up here trying to show the situation, where you've got what he's proposing to do in his letter to us, basically, is provide an exception to the 15-foot buffer requirement in the instance where the comprehensive plan reflects that on the property that's now zoned, because he rezoned it to R2 and he's building multifamily on it, where the comp plan indicates that the adjacent property is also indicated in the comprehensive plan to be suitable for transition to higher density, therefore being in accordance with the comprehensive plan if someone was to request rezoning it also to R2. That in that instance, and that's on location number 2 on this slide, in that case where he's building multifamily, there would be no extra buffer. There would be the standards. We've gone through this at the previous hearing. So this was a way to try to visually show you what that meant if anyone was having trouble understanding that. So there'd be no buffer. There'd be an exception in the case where the comprehensive plan showed the adjacent property to be also high density, suitable for rezoning, but still R1 zone today. Versus location number 1 here, where you're building multifamily development, and the code that's in effect today says there's a 15-foot buffer requirement shown in hash, because the adjacent property is still zoned R1 and also still zoned indicated on the comprehensive plan to only be suitable for low density. Therefore, they need protection and certainty there in that location number 1 situation, because even if they wanted to rezone to R2, it would be against the comprehensive plan to do so, because the line was drawn here when the comprehensive plan map was adopted, saying that we got to draw a line somewhere, and we want to provide the opportunity for high density housing because we're mandated by law to do that in locations within the community. So we're going to do it here, but we're not going to allow anybody to propose it any further. So what we're in effect saying here is that whereas Commissioner Mills felt very strongly that we should be protecting that adjacent property, whether it's still designated on the comp plan as low density residential or high density, we're saying, and the developer is saying, that I need protection. I'm following your comprehensive plan. I rezoned the property, and we want housing types of all type, but you're making it more difficult for that to happen, because most of the instances where you're rezoning and we have these transition areas, they're in areas that are already developed single family and they have fairly small lot sizes. Those work fine for the detached single family homes that were built in the 40s. It doesn't work well when you're trying to redevelop that property for a multifamily development. So 7 or 8 additional feet, reducing the buffer to the standard 7-foot side yard rather than the 15-foot, makes a lot of difference in the success of whether he can actually get the number of units that he has to meet the minimum density requirement and be successful in redeveloping the property. So he would either have to swallow up more lots, which is really difficult to do because you have to have willing sellers. So you go in and you find a willing seller that happens to be in the situation of location number 2. And without the buffer, he says, I can usually make multifamily development work and meet the minimum density requirement. So we're saying that this is really an exception that's being proposed, is a way to protect the option for high density to go where we want it to go by the comprehensive plan. And so, you know, you can look at it from either direction. It's whatever by policy is most important to you, to always protect that existing house, or recognize there's a difference in protecting it when it's low density on the comp plan and maybe not protecting it quite as much when there's, and giving an exception to that buffer requirement when it's intended to transition, and we'd actually like it to be available for transitioning. And if you think about it, it definitely gives that property owner that has it as HDR but still zoned R1 a much higher value to their property. It may hurt their livability while they're there, but it gives them a higher redevelopment value to their property because of the HDR designation. So there are reasons to, you know, how much do you want to protect that existing homeowner who's actually benefiting from that HDR versus recognize the developer of the high density development needs some protection too. And that's what providing this exception would do. Staff didn't propose this. This was proposed by a developer. We reviewed it, thought about it quite a bit, had trouble coming up with appropriate wording, but finally said, yeah, we think that's a reasonable thing. It helps us further multifamily development, which is, as you know, fairly difficult to do because it's almost always somewhere adjacent to existing single-family detached homes, and there's always protests. So I was going to read the wording, if I can find that one, because we tried to clarify it as well. 1628.5.
Can I say something before you get to that?
You sure can.
And a lot of it has to do with this HB 2001, where they're saying that you can't demand only single-family dwellings in an R1 zone now. The state just passed that as a code, I guess. I guess we're talking about that later. Without that buffer zone, wouldn't that even make it more complicated for us? Or would that buffer zone make it harder to do that in the single-family residential zone?
I don't know if I can
Because
think through that or not scenario. All that bill is doing for Canby is saying that any zone that allows a single-family home, also those lots have to allow a duplex.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so,
We have to allow a duplex?
yes.
That's what the state's trying
And
to.
so there'll be.
But that's not HDR.
No, we're not, it's not really analogous
Yeah.
to this because
Different situation.
it's same zoning. The properties all have the same zoning, but now that zoning district also allows by right a duplex. So
Well, we have to.
setbacks
Would
don't
that be
matter.
something that we would have to approve or disapprove? Or is it just something that's
We'll have
been
to-
taken out of
No,
our hands?
because if a use is allowed outright, you never see a land use application in
We
front.
may have to work on the code revisions for it.
Yes, you'll see code
We'll work on that.
revisions
Well, why
to,
don't
Then
we
once-
just work on telling the state to go shove it for a change?
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
Here.
to get what you vote for, you
Yeah,
know?
you'll see the code amendments, but it's just an outright permitted use, and therefore, all they need usually is a building permit, especially when it's houses involved. Yeah. So you don't review duplexes or those kind of
And
things.
a lot of municipalities already allow duplexes in R1, so,
But wouldn't this make it where a guy can go in an R1 zone and build a duplex right 7 feet from your property line?
Yeah, that you have the same standard side
Same,
yard setbacks.
But the buffer zone
There'd
that
just
we
be-
have now,
There'd just be 2 units next door rather than one unit. And it could vary. You could have, it just depends on what condition and whether somebody's ready to sell their home and somebody thinks it's worth building a duplex rather than keeping a single-family home and that kind of thing. I'm having trouble finding,
Page 50?
I don't know why. Okay, here it is. It's page 50, you're right. I'm just under the stress up here, I guess. All right, let me read this to you, the new wording, just to make sure. And then to me, you asked us to try to figure out some new wording, so we did, to make it clearer. But in the end, you either provide the exception the developer's asking for, or you leave it as it is. It's one or the other. And staff, it doesn't really matter. We think it's reasonable what he's asking for. So we wanted to make it clear if you approve it, so everybody could understand the code, because that was a question before. So if proposed multifamily developments are adjacent to lots currently zoned R1 or R1.5, but the R1 or R1.5 zone properties are designated high-density residential on the comprehensive plan map and therefore available for future high-density development, then the multifamily development is not subject to the 15-foot buffer criteria listed in this section and can provide the normal setbacks for the zone, which is 7 foot rather than the 15. This caveat is intended to protect the land value of the lots zoned for high density and avoid unduly burdening them with providing buffers next to land that will also intended for future high-density uses in the long term per the comprehensive plan. Proposed multifamily developments are still required to provide a minimum 15-foot buffer adjacent to lots zoned for R1 or R1.5 uses that are also designated low-density residential in the comprehensive plan. In these locations, the additional buffer would protect low-density residential uses not expected to be redeveloped in the future. So there's our language, so we make it clear should you recommend approval of this proposed change by Jason Bristol.
I've got a question. So in location 2, currently the way the code is written is that there would have to be a 15-foot buffer on that shared property line, is that correct?
On both of those scenarios, there would have to be that 15 today. It doesn't provide the exception that location 2 talks about.
So the real change is really just changing the 15-foot setback to a 7-foot setback on location 2, is that right?
Yeah.
Which then allows for development and per the comp plan for a higher residential or density zone.
Yeah, so in that case where there's an exception to the 15-foot, he would have to provide a 7-foot. So yes, you'd have the multifamily looming over an existing single-family home, but only on a single-family home that is designated for transition in the future with an easy rezone request in conformance with the comp plan to high-density use.
I'm going to jump in here and I guess voice again my opposition to this. I think that this is a very clearly shows that the adjacent property is in effect being rezoned, whether they want to be or not. And I guess I spent a lot of time since our last meeting trying to, understand where I was and why I was there and what is the comp plan and what is zoning. And I did a little searching around and I found a document. It's prepared by the city of Portland, so you can take that for what it's worth. But it answers the question, what is the difference between the comprehensive plan map and zoning? What is the difference? And with your permission, I'm going to read this because I'd like it in the record. Both depict how land can be used and developed over time. using a set of designations and zones shown as colors on the map. Both show broad categories of uses such as residential, mixed-use, industrial, employment, and open space. They also convey information about the scale of future development, type and size of buildings. The comprehensive plan map is about the future. The comprehensive plan map depicts a long-term vision of how and where the city will grow and change over the next 20 years to accommodate expected population and job growth. The zoning map is about what is allowed today. Decisions about comprehensive plan designations directly guide subsequent decisions about zoning. The city's zoning map tells us how land can be used and what can be built on any given property today. Zones are more specific than the comprehensive plan designation and come with a set of rules, including in the city zoning code, that clarify what uses are allowed, e.g. residences, businesses, manufacturing, and how buildings may be developed or changed. Example, maximum heights and required setbacks from property lines. The comp plan and zoning map are like a leader and a follower. The plan map is the leading map and the zone map is the following map. The zone map can catch up to the plan map, but it can't go past it. The plan map is a long-range map saying that what will be allowed 20 years from now, while the zone map says what is allowed now. For most properties in the city, what is allowed now and what will be allowed 20 years from now are essentially the same. But in what we're talking about here is a case where it's not. And I'm going to offer that I disagree with staff, and I think it's entirely improper to utilize comprehensive plan map to effectively make a zoning change that's not approved. I mean, if we want to upzone to match what we have in our comprehensive plan, we should take steps as a city to do that. We should do that. There's a public forum for doing that, and that's what we should do. We shouldn't do it this way. We shouldn't backdoor it in. It's just not a proper use of the comprehensive plan. It's not a proper use.
Any thoughts?
I agree.
Okay, Brian, you have more?
Yeah, so then let's go on to the fourth and final concern that was voiced at the last public hearing. This was related to use of private streets in a manner that impacts minimum lot size and density. So the primary example, I don't think you were on the commission then, was there was a development proposed in 600 block or something of South Ivy Street that had a mixture of existing detached single-family homes, some vacant lots that were in the area, and had proposed a mixture of detached single-family homes and 3 or 4 townhomes as well in one section, all accessible by a private road internal there, coming off of 6th Avenue or something that was fairly close to Ivy Street. The issue that came up in the review of that, and it was eventually denied, was that the single-family home lots that were proposed put the lot lines out to the center of the street. Now, when you're using public streets, you have right-of-way, and your lot area stops at the right-of-way line, and so your lot area doesn't include any portion of the street. So by including a portion of the street, he in effect had squeezed probably at least 1, if not 2 additional home sites into that area. I can't remember now. Was it R1 zoning or R1.5? Do you remember?
It was going 1.5 to vacancy.
Yeah, so what we had proposed in the code to handle that, I mean, there's different ways we could handle it, but I've seen it done the way that we proposed, was simply whenever a private street is utilized, when you have multiple lots that are taking access to that, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, it's a private street. You don't want them coming in 20 years when it starts falling apart and asking the city to take it over. No, it's forever a private road. It's the responsibility of the private property owners that are taking access from that. And one of the good ways to make sure that they realize that is make it a common tract, which then forces the developer to establish CC&Rs and potentially a homeowners association that collects money over time to fix and replace the street, because it's private and it will eventually fall apart and have potholes in it. And by making it a private tract, that area cannot be counted towards the lot areas that you have, that you're platting. Therefore, you can't make a 7,000 square foot lot with 1/3 of it in the middle of the road where it's not usable, therefore changing the density allowed in that area. So it's a way of recognizing that it's a loophole that was allowed by the code, that the developer figured that out, that by putting the property lines down the center of the road, he could actually squeeze in additional density in an area. We've, I think what I said here, let's see. All we've done really is from the concern that was voiced, wasn't really that we're proposing the use of the tract, but that there's an opportunity for private streets to be used with partitions. We talked about that earlier. It's extremely rare, but if you were doing 3 lots, there could be a common road. And so we went ahead and put the same provision that we put in the subdivision portion of the code for the tract. We put that same provision in the partition area. It wasn't really needed, likely, because we have a provision that in doing a partition, which is only 3 lots, no more, that you can't count the access strip for a flag lot as part of your lot area. So it already excludes that in partitions. But we went ahead and put that provision in there in that section of the code as well, just to make it clear that if you're creating a private street, it needs to be a separate tract on the partition plat. Just in a subdivision on the plat itself, it needs to be a separate tract so that you don't have someone trying to squeeze more lots in an area using the street that can't be developed with a home. That's really the only changes that the memo addresses. If there's, it's another public hearing, if there's other issues that people wanted to discuss, they're welcome to do that tonight. Any other areas that you wanted to discuss any further? But we didn't make any other changes in the code other than what we've reviewed here tonight from the first public hearing.
Okay. Any questions on this portion of it?
Yeah, where's this language? Is this in this package or not? What you just described?
Yeah, it's, let's see if we can find it, 166410.
6410, okay.
1660.
So it must be in the back.
I don't know why I get lost in here. I can,
166410. Was that correct?
I see, yeah, I see 1660, but then it,
Yes, on 16.
Here we go. 358. 350.
258?
356 is where I see 166410,
64.
but maybe not seeing any language mods here. Oh, here we go. Here it is, on page 359.
Yep. Yeah, we got P
Okay.
is where we've inserted it, a new P. It says, "Private streets created within a new subdivision or partition shall be designated as separate tract on the submitted plat map." Let's
That's
see.
it.
And so we also put that in the very first section of 1660 on page 350. It's actually, where did we put that? Okay, it's
Oh.
on page 351
Yeah.
in the first paragraph.
So now,
Where,
Brian, this is a case where we've kind of said you're recommending we have just partitions, no minor, no majors, and that seems to be, I was noting earlier that, we've got 1660 that says major and minor partitions. So I guess we're not talking about changing this also, just
Actually-
going in and eradicating major and minor terminology.
yeah, we should be crossing out on the partition chapter 2, and it just got missed as we were making those changes at the last minute. So we'll see what your decision is regarding that. Maybe you
Well, no, I
continue to require the public hearings, but then there's still the decision, do you support the idea of getting rid of this distinction? Because we still don't feel like there's any need to make a distinction between them.
Are
A
you
partition's a partition.
Are you asking us? I support getting rid of the major or minor partitions as long as we continue. And I don't mind the $250 appeal fee if we continue to have public hearings. That's where I stand on that.
So, I have a question, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how this works, but surprise, surprise, I'm gonna vote no on approving this packet tonight, but how can you guys say you're gonna push this to city council with your ideas and preferences. How do we all have kind of separate reasons we're voting no? How would that work?
Well, how it works is, and it's really common, is that even on development applications, that on an application that you're making a recommendation for, we do findings of what your decision was and what you based it on. We don't change the fact of what the applicant's requesting. And so in this particular case, just because the planning staff feels strongly about that particular item, one out of all the ones we've done, we wouldn't then change the wording. We would leave it as it was proposed and share with the city council who makes the final decision what your reasoning was for not supporting that particular change in the provision, and then let them make the final decision, and we'll make the change in all this code, this pages and stuff, so we don't have to keep changing, and printing out 450 pages constantly each time.
Well, so what I'm asking is when you say I'm confused about what you mean. Are you talking about me personally? Because
No,
some of us
whatever
on
the-
here, but we all have different
Yeah, it's whatever the
reasons.
final decision is as a group, that goes into the findings. Individual, commissioners' opinions are voiced, but that's not what go in the
Sure.
record.
Yeah.
It's whatever gets
No, I get that.
approved. And that's what the city council, but they'll also get the minutes, and they'll hear what the individual, if they read the minutes, they'll hear what individual commissioners said, but that's not in the findings that goes to the council.
Can I?
Yes.
Chair?
Oh, and just to comment on your 250, that's totally inapplicable if partitions come to the planning commission, because then it would be an appeal from the planning commission, which is still $2,000 to the council.
Okay, and we discussed it first was the alleys. I wanted to get some stuff straight on that. Since I don't know how you're going to put an alley in minor partitions or small lots and stuff, What about, and our main concern is the access for the fire department. What about sprinkler systems in those units? Instead of, wouldn't that be cheaper than trying to build alleys all over the place?
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that the building code and the National Fire Code, everybody's building townhomes all across the nation, and the codes are meant to apply to townhomes, and they haven't said that you can't have middle units unless you have an alley.
But doesn't that go to, and I guess I should wait till she speaks, but it kind of goes to her point, right? Because what she was saying is last century, everybody was building without fire protective materials.
Right.
Until we started having these fires.
So if you want to be the forward-leading policy makers that jump on the bandwagon to kind of force building codes and fire codes to change, when what I've heard is they fight the fire by going up over the roof, and that's how they get to a fire that might be in the rear. They go up over the roof, and they have little holder things that are put on new homes today, and that's how they've addressed it by building codes
I'm not a firefighter. I have no idea.
and that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that it's not better. I 100% agree that if you had an alley, it's more accessible, but how about high-rises? And there's a fire, and, oh, you can't go anywhere but up and hope a helicopter will take you off. Or how about small detached single-family homes that are in mid-block, and they fence their backyard, and they're elderly, and they can't climb over the fence when they're trying to escape their home. It's no different than the townhome. We don't make every single-family detached home have an alley. It's not any different.
My understanding with this from my design, working with developers and meeting code and fire code and whatnot, is that when fire truck pulls up in front of the house or the property or whatever it is, regardless of what kind of development it is, fire truck will pull into the driveway if there is a driveway, or into the parking lot, or park in front of the street, and then they require minimum 250 feet of fire hose from the fire truck to wrap around the building so that they can have hoses on either side. And if they can reach the entire building within 250 feet, and that'll be fine. If they can't do that, then they need to have an access into the property or around the property to get to within 250 feet. That's deemed reasonable enough for firefighters to stretch out the hose and fight the fire, jump over fences or whatever they have for obstructions. And if they can't do that, then they require fire sprinklers.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, any more questions for Brian before we move on to public comment? Oddly enough, why look, we have the Taylors back visiting. You know, Regina, do you pronounce your name Regina or Regina?
I pronounce my name Gina.
Gina. And
I'm only called Regina if I'm in trouble.
well, Regina, you must think of yourself as being in trouble because that's what you put down here.
I usually am in trouble.
Please state your name and address and all that for the record, please.
Okay. My name is Regina Taylor. I live at 173 Southwest 6th Avenue in Canby. Hello, everybody. And again, I have too much to say, so this is going to go fast. I was unable to find a kind, gracious way to deliver this message in the short amount of time I have to testify, so I apologize if my words sound caustic or mean. I honestly only want to help, and I honestly have great respect for our planning department, commissioners, and council. Please take this to heart as you hear my message. Please, please, please accept these comments as being constructive in nature and not destructive. My intent is to build up and improve, not to tear down or destroy. Please do not amend major and minor partitions from type 3 to type 2 because eliminating both public testimony and review by the commissioners eliminates the expertise these individuals in each group can provide. It is not possible for any single individual, in this case the planning director, to have the expertise, foresight, and knowledge that the community as a whole can provide to the decision-making process or the application review process. I make these comments based on my own past experience. In the fall of 2017, a developer filed an application to develop 3 parcels in my neighborhood. I had not been interested in land use prior to this time. I found the staff report online and read the criteria the planning department had used to approve the application. I suddenly became interested in land use and studied the resources on the city website. For the first time in my life, I submitted public comments and testified at the public hearing. In my ignorance of land use, I had stumbled upon and raised these questions or concerns. The planning staff's review failed to uncover that all 3 parcels were labeled areas of special concern C in the comprehensive plan, so staff had not required the developer to follow these additional restrictions. The planning staff's interpretations of the word access easement allowed the developer to overlay a private road on top of the individual lots, and they gave approval for high-density housing in a medium-density zone. The planning staff approved locating 4 guest parking spots on one person's lot, which also skewed the density since paved guest parking is really not usable by the lot owner. The planning staff approved the application, which lacked sidewalks, which are required by ordinance. The planning staff approved a 2-foot setback between a driveway and an existing dwelling when ordinance requires 5 feet. Outcome, the developer indicated making the requested changes would reduce the number of lots and not financially feasible at that time. Later, I participated in 3 additional land use decisions. In July 2018, I emailed Brian about the 38 high-density townhouses the planning department had approved for the corner of Ivy and 13th Street and asked them to verify when the land had been rezoned from R1. After my inquiry, the planning department determined the land had never been rezoned, but they had overlooked this fact in the year it took them to review the application. I also testified that the planning department was in error in approving the application that included up to 9 linked townhouses since our ordinance limit is 2 linked units. The length of these buildings exceeded our ordinance, and the rainwater swale cannot be considered to satisfy the requirement for open space. In September 2018, I testified regarding an application for 2 3-unit townhouses in an R2 zone, referencing the ordinance that limits townhouses to 2 linked units. Ultimately, the commission approved the application, but simultaneously requested an update to the townhouse ordinance. That was a good move. In 2018, I gave public testimony for a petition application, this is bringing it all home, in which a homeowner on Southwest 8th Avenue had 2 options for placing the driveway for access to the flag lot they intended to create behind their home. The staff report said the flag lot required a minimum 12-foot wide driveway. The application showed the driveway was to be placed immediately adjacent to the existing home. I testified that the roof overhang of the home reduced the actual usable driveway area to less than 12 feet. I recommended the driveway to the flag lot be placed on the other side of the home where there was 38 feet of clear space available to locate the driveway. The commissioners approved the application as it had been filed and in following the advice of the Planning Commission. I have since identified an ordinance that the Planning Department did not apply in the review process, and maybe the tenured commissioners should have been aware of, which requires a 5-foot setback from the access strip. The planning staff overlooked or failed to apply this ordinance during the review of the partition request. See the screenshot below. For resident, it's ordinance 1664-040I3. For residential flag lots, a minimum building setback of 5 feet from the access strip shall be maintained where such buildings exist prior to the creation of the flag lot. Does this mean the planning staff allowed creation of an illegal lot? That $419,000 home was built on the lot and is listed for sale today. That scares me. While these cases represent the limit of my experience in land use decisions, I have witnessed how very complicated land use decisions can be. They are proof that our most expert planning department employees overlook vital resources, misinterpret and/or misapply our ordinances. Please retain our current process for major and minor partition, which promotes and encourages public participation without the $250 fee. My own experience displays how an extra set of eyes on an application can spot irregularities that slip past the planning department. Our current process also places each application before the Planning Commission for additional review and input. Other topics, which I also covered on our last meeting. I want to highlight the lack of attention to detail that occurs in the reports submitted by the planning director and his staff. Please understand my goal is to provide constructive criticism and not tear down anyone. I simply want to impress how important it is for us to retain the ability for citizens and the commissioners to remain involved in all land use decisions, including partitions. Please refer to Brian Brown's memorandum dated July 8, 2019 for tonight's meeting, located in Packet 2, pages 1 through 5 of the 426-page document. Below is a screenshot of page 2 of the planning director's memorandum. Ignoring the grammatical errors, there are significant technical errors. Notice the math. Brian says 7 plus 7 plus 10 is 20. Gina says 7 plus 7 plus 10 is 24. Brian says townhouses in R1 will be limited to 3 attached units without providing a 10-foot separation. Brian says townhouses in R2 will be limited to 6 attached units without providing a 10-foot separation. Townhouses are only allowed in these 2 zones, so where exactly will the 10-foot separation be enforced? It is important for the commissioners to clarify in which zones the 10-foot separation should apply, but also to have a venue for monitoring the adherence of the ordinance, since the planning director seems confused by it. Notice the amended text in the body of Ordinance 1618-010C references the separation and includes the bad math, which perhaps indicates Brian does intend to update our 1.5. After all, I'm really baffled on what the intent was there. Below is a screenshot of page 4 of the planning director's memorandum, packet 2, page 1 through 5. There are 5 topic areas in which concern was raised about the proposed text language or the intended objective. While Brian states there are 5 topics, he only addresses 4 of them. The planning director omitted my question number 5, where I asked what provisions do we impose on the 10-foot separation between townhouses? Is it going to be a separate lot? Do we have an HOA? Can they put a dog run there? What do we do with it? Please review the proposed wording of 1618-100 in the screenshot below. I urge the commission to limit the authority of the planning director to administrative review type 1 only, and do not include type 2, as it appears the commission has not discussed that topic, but the general wording administrative review would encompass both levels 1 and 2. This is far too much authority for one individual to wield. Further, Brian's comments and reasoning regarding the medical hardship applications or licensing requirements for daycare facilities, which was the reason he proposed this, will not carry forth with the amended text, inadvertently allowing it to be applied to unintended and widespread applications by future employees of the planning department and others involved in land use decisions. It simply appears the planning department was in too much of a rush to amend that ordinance. Please create enforceable definition of a private street so developers will not be able to trick the planning staff as they have done in the past by using words private access easement, private road, or other secretive, vague, or enforceable phrases. Refer to the current proposed language in Packet 2, page 56 of the 426 pages. Private streets created by the partition shall be designated as a separate tract on a partition plat to prevent the private street area from being included in the lot area minimum requirements. That's a good start. I think we need to improve it on a little bit, though. I attended all 5 of the meetings for the text amendments, submitted 3 public comments, and testified at the last Planning Commission meeting, making a plea for the inclusion of sidewalk or alley behind the townhouses that include a middle unit. Thus far, I have not heard the opinion of the individuals on the commission on this topic, and I'm asking them to individually and publicly announce their stance on this subject as a courtesy to me, the planning staff, and the city council and the citizens of Canby. Your rejection or inclusion of these attributes will be shaping our future neighborhoods for decades. I feel certain the city council would like to know your thoughts on this subject when they review these suggested amendments. I admit I have not reviewed every text amendment that was proposed. I hope the commissioners have taken the time to thoughtfully review each and every one, and I thank you for your time and efforts as you serve the citizens of Canby. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Any questions for Ms. Taylor?
Too much again.
So, Robert, do you...
I gave my time away.
I understand. So, Brian, do you have any?
Oh, I'm not sure that I necessarily do. I might mention that the very first example that she provided, it's under the heading of a major minor partition when that development that she cited was a subdivision. It was much larger development than you would get from a partition, so it really isn't, her comments aren't applicable for the first at all.
Okay.
And there was one other that, I'm not sure that I can explain it right now, but she implied that we had overlooked the 5-foot setback on an access strip. In reality, we interpreted that the 5-foot only applied to a situation where you didn't have otherwise have a public street frontage, and that lot that was using the access strip wasn't needed because they actually had frontage on a street. And so I think somewhere in there we were fully aware of the setback requirement. We didn't think it applied in this particular instance because of the uniqueness of the flag lot actually having access on a public street. They couldn't take access, but it provided a means for fire department to fight a fire from the public street where you normally don't have that. And so the 12-foot wide width is for fire trucks to get in, and that wasn't as critical in that case because they had firefighting ability on a public street, which you never have with a flag lot arrangement. But in that case, you did.
Okay. So, closing the public testimony part of this, let's move on to deliberating this. How would the other commissioners like to proceed? Individually?
I guess I'm wondering, it feels like each one of these, perhaps we want to have a head nod or comment as we just work our way through them. I'm just ask the chair that, if that sounds good to the other members.
Can we approve them individually, or if we,
I mean,
how do you want to do it, Brian, or just?
What I would like to see you do is actually try to, in some way, respond to the new proposed wording
Okay.
for those areas so that we know whether we're going with that or whether we're not making a change at all.
yeah,
And that allows us to, prepare the memorandum to go on to the council who's going to make the final decision and such.
okay.
Sure. Jeff, you want to?
Well, I'm just looking, you've got them at the start of package number 2, Brian, you've got these changes numbered, is that correct? I see number 1, number 2, 3, and I'm just wondering if we should just work our way down 1, 2, 3 and get a sense of the commission for staff.
Yep. You want to start?
Sure, I'll start. We can start on number 1.
Start on number 1.
Okay.
That's usually a great place.
That's a good place
In the
to start.
beginning.
Townhouse dwellings having common wall construction, and this is where a lot of testimony was given about the allowance for, whether we have to have a requirement for a back alley in all cases for townhouses. And I guess I'll start on this one in saying that I don't feel like it's practical for infill projects to have it as long as there is safe access for emergency services, and I think that that's going to be part of the permitting process. So I guess I'm okay with the exception for not having back alley for infill townhouse.
Okay. Andre, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I would assume that the Canby Fire District or Department reviews partitions and subdivisions for fire, life, and safety reasons. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, they have an opportunity to do so.
Okay. So,
And it's been my experience that they do. They weigh in.
so if there's
We usually get comments, but not always.
Yeah.
So, and when we don't know 100% sure whether they just didn't feel like they needed to comment that time. That's why we'd like to get them all the time. No comments, return something that says no comments. Then we know they at least reviewed it.
Yeah, if they're the experts in their field and they're the ones that are fighting the fire, they should provide comment. And that's their opportunity to raise up any issues instead of after the fact. So we should be relying on their expertise since they're doing the work. So I think that's basically what I'd leave. That's the only comments that I'd have. Otherwise, I think having planned unit developments, have alleys, I think that would be nice to have. But infill projects, I would agree that it doesn't make sense to require an alley because they probably just wouldn't have townhomes in those infill situations.
Right?
I'm not going to take issue with this one. I think save my issues for the next three, probably.
Mr. Boatright.
Well, I'm opposed to requiring back alleys for infill or the new construction and projects.
And I will agree with Andre and Commissioner Mills for this. I think that we'll leave it to the experts on the fire department to tell us, to guide us on issues of fire safety, and having a requirement for alleys for all, it doesn't make a lot of practical sense to me. So yes. So are we good with that one? Let's move on to number 2.
So what I take away from that is that you actually support the proposed wording.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Chalk up a win for you there. Right now.
Well, 4 to 1.
Okay, so move on to number 2. Can you, in a nutshell, restate that?
So again, number 2 is about partitions and changing from a type 3 to a type 2 process, type 2 being administrative approval by the Planning Commission. And we also introduced the idea of getting rid of the distinction between major and minor. So there's 2 topics on this one.
Who'd like to start off on that? Andre?
Sure, yeah. I would, like most towns, I think, have these partitions as administrative review, mainly because I think as the town grows, there's a lot of them that occur, and it takes up time for staff and the Planning Commission. It also makes it easier for developers to get these partitions approved. I think, from my experience, when a land use decision has to come before the body of the Planning Commission, there's more risk involved because there's more unknowns as to what the city council Planning Commission will decide compared to going through the administrative review. There's less risk. It's kind of more consistent reviews, and they kind of understand what they're going to get when they kind of get into it. But there's more risk when it comes before a Planning Commission because dealing with more lay people that sometimes make different decisions are not always consistent. So there's 2 points there. I think there's more cost, more risk. There may be less infill partitions because of that. But it also gives the opportunity to citizens to voice their opinion. Otherwise, developers could just kind of steamroll their project through. Even though that there would be a time for neighbors to talk to Brian and voice their concerns, they may not just be able to voice them publicly, which may make them feel that they don't have much of a voice. So there's pros and cons to both.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm against it. And there's a couple of reasons. I think the first one was demonstrated tonight with Gina coming up here and talking. I think that's a perfect example of a citizen, having valid, valuable input to provide fellow citizens, to kind of make us take a second look at things. And I was struck by that. I think I don't really care so much if the staff takes over the decision making. What I care about is the $250 hurdle that it may place in front of folks that may not have that $250 to just come and talk to the Planning Commission. And so I know, Commissioner Spoatright and Mr. Chair, wanted the ability for the citizens to go right to the Planning Commission. And I guess I don't really see a difference in that, because I think if we took a $0 appeal fee, it would give anybody the opportunity to come and voice their concerns while seemingly getting toward the goal that the commission is. So it strikes me as that maybe some sort of compromise there. I'm not sure, but I'm against it because it has the $250, essentially what I would look at as a tax that was not there before, but is there now, and it presents a barrier to the citizens from coming in here and having access to their government. So that's my position on it. I'm against it.
Mr. Boatright.
I'm against it. I don't mind the language where they get rid of major and minor, as long as it still comes before, they both come before the Planning Commission. And the fee is not, I don't think I wouldn't have a problem with a fee if they were allowed, if it was still going before the Planning Commission, but I don't believe even if they waived the fee and they were allowed to go before the planning director and make their complaints known to him, it would be like a private thing and not generate public input, which is what I think is really important with this commission. It lets everybody in the community that's interested to actually view it on television, and they all participate really because of that. So I'm opposed to it.
Mr. Mills.
Yeah, I'm going to be supportive of the language change, the delineation between major and minor. I think going with more, I'll use the word commonplace language is, I think, a good idea. I'm very sensitive to what the other commissioners have said about access of the public. I do like the idea of taking it to type 2, but I could only support that if there was a zero appeal fee. Then that gives them, the public, access free of charge back to the Planning Commission if they see something happening that they don't like.
Well, I've always been in favor of more public access, the better. And I agree with Commissioner Adams that the $250 feels pretty much like a tax to me. I don't mind eliminating the distinction between a major and a minor petition. That's fine. But I will be casting my vote against this based upon the $250 fee and the lack of access to the Planning Commission on that. So.
I've got a follow-up question. The previous fee was it $1,900 for an appeal?
Yeah,
Still is.
1,900 plus.
That was to go from Planning Commission to the City Council?
No, that was from a planning director decision to the Planning Commission.
Okay, so it's being reduced down to $250. So, there's some cost incurred. Who pays for that cost? Is that the city that pays for it, or is that passed on to the developer? Where's the cost picked up at?
So there, theoretically, the cost of the appeal was similar to other applications that come before the Planning Commission. They're generally in the ballpark. They're not exactly the same because of all of the administrative work for putting notices up and in the paper and doing the mailings and all of that kind of thing. So if we have a public hearing, things do cost about that much. So if we have an appeal that's zero cost, the taxpayers are eating that.
Well, no, wait a minute, let me interrupt, because I had asked earlier if there was a fee previous to this, and I thought that the answer was no. And I thought that the answer was no, because before this, it had been in our purview and not yours. So it wouldn't make sense to me that there'd be a fee to appeal it from you if there's nothing to appeal from you.
Well, we're not talking about an appeal if it's a land use application to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, which it is today. We were talking about changing that. So there is a land use application fee that, I don't know what it is, I don't have our new fee schedule for,
Well, I guess help me understand, Brian. So is there a fee right now, the way that this is on the books right now? I'm not talking about what we're proposing.
Yeah.
The way this is on the books right now, is there a $1,960 fee from your office to our
No.
table here?
yeah, there is a land use application fee to come before the Planning Commission for a major or minor partition. There is a difference in that fee, and it's probably fairly close to 2,000. I can't remember.
So it's a
exactly what it
$2,000
is.
application fee,
Right.
not an appeal fee?
No, there's
Okay,
no
that's what I must have
appeal.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
So really, this isn't, we're not reducing it from 1960 to 250. Really, what we're doing is we're adding 250 to 1960.
Yeah, and we would be changing our fee schedule if this partition is moved down to an administrative, because there would be less costs involved. And then the only thing that would be eaten by the taxpayers, if it's appealed, because it would then be zero.
Okay. So the taxpayers would eat,
So, and if it's not
17,000
appealed.
people would eat $250, basically?
Yeah, and I wouldn't think that every application would be appealed at the administrative level.
Yeah.
But if it is, and it's a zero cost, then there would be some unreimbursable costs that staff would have.
All right.
Do we vote on that yet?
Oh, yeah.
I think that, I'm not quite, are you voting against this, all part of it?
Oh, I forgot.
I'm supportive of the language change. I'm supportive of taking it from type T to type 3 to type 2 if the appeal fee goes to zero. So I'm opposed to the $250 appeal fee. So if it goes as stands, I'd be opposed. But I guess part of what I'm trying to do is give staff some input on what they could do, to soften opposition. I don't know, Brian, is that helpful for you or not? So
I'm
or just-
sorry I didn't hear all of that. We just discovered on our fee schedule, and we'd totally forgotten about that, that if you appeal a type 1 or 2 decision, which we're proposing that the partition become a type 2 decision by the planning director, if the $250 appeal fee is refunded if the appellant prevails at the hearing.
That
So-
doesn't change my
I
analysis.
just wanted you to be aware of that, is that if they appeal it because they think I made the wrong decision and you overturn it, we refund their fee.
It also tests the mettle of, how strongly do they feel about how far, I see the logic for that.
I mean, that was trying to get at your concern
Yeah.
by refunding the fee if they prevail.
Well, no, it doesn't get at my concern, because it doesn't give them, my concern isn't about somebody coming in and prevailing. My concern is that they have the ability to talk to
Right.
somebody other than an administrator in a city hall.
Right.
No, and I
Right.
don't mean any offense to
No,
your position. I
not
think
at
you do a
all.
valuable job, but part of being in a society is being able to come talk to other citizens that represent you, and I
Yeah.
think that's important.
I guess it doesn't change where I'm at. I think if we're going to go type 2, we need to waive the appeal fee.
Yeah.
Given the sense of what I've heard here.
So the issue would be if you end up moving after this discussion towards what are we doing with this tonight, it still would be useful either in your motion overall to specify these two issues here. I mean, get rid of major and minor, and potentially making it administrative review without an appeal fee, or leave it as it is. altogether. And so hearing differing opinions. I'm not sure what the vote, if you were to take a vote right now, which we come out to, but there seems to be some support for getting rid of the major-minor distinction. I would say that you pretty much seem to agree with that, and that you might actually approve the idea of administrative if there's no appeal fee, because then it's very easy for somebody to come if they don't like the decision that I made within 10 days. I guess it's 10 days. They say they want to appeal it, then we place it at no cost onto your agenda.
Mr. Boatright.
Yeah, I oppose the administrative change, period. I think they need to come before the Planning Commission. I don't mind the changing or lumping the type 1 or the minor and major partitions together. But that's the only thing that I agree with. So I'm opposed to it.
Brian?
Oh, I said my piece, I guess.
Okay.
I'm good.
I would support going with the zero fee, but having them sent over to Brian, have him review it, and if there's no issues, then saves us some time. But if there is concern, that it goes to the Planning Commission, we can then hear those concerns. And then also combining or getting rid of the major and minor.
So,
You would probably end up in some way potentially become fully aware if something was appealed. But one of the advantages of the appeal process is that you're supposed to specify what your beef is. And so that you don't necessarily have to spend your time reviewing everything that was agreed to. If there was just one thing that you had a problem with, that's what you focus on with an appeal. Whereas an actual land use application, you review all the parameters and everything. And so that's how appeals usually work, is you try to get them to specify, well, what's the basis of your appeal?
Keeping in mind that we're talking about partitions only for three or fewer lots, I hope that's right, because my experience with appeals is they appeal everything under the sun that's in the language. But I hope you're right in this case.
so what I'm hearing is that no one has an issue with eliminating the language between major and minor petitions. We're all on board with that.
Correct.
I'm also hearing that we would, from some of us, that we would like to not have it be an administrative decision, but we'd like the folks to be able to come in and say their piece. How many are on board with that?
I am.
I am.
I guess I just don't understand, and maybe you can clarify here, because I don't understand what the difference is there, because it seems like everybody would still have that same opportunity to come in and say their piece if the fee was at $0. So I don't know, are we that far apart on something like that, or maybe I could get some more rationale on it?
Well, it's clear to me whether you're for the administration making those decisions or not. I'm not.
Okay.
And I am not.
Okay.
Jeff?
I'm good with the administration making the decision as long as there's appeal route available at $0.
Andre?
I would agree with that.
I'm fine with the administration making that decision. I want to make it clear I'm not fine with that to the extent it costs 1 cent to appeal it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the majority of the commissioners are good with having the administration make the decision, but predicated that there is 0 fees involved.
Got it?
Okay. Number 3, Brian, let's move on to that.
So this one here, I think, is fairly clear now, is that if you support the exception that was requested by Jason Bristol to the 15-foot buffer standard that we have that applies anytime you're doing multifamily next to a single-family zone property, whether it's, comp plan says it's LDR or HDR, which is high density versus low density. You don't want to make a distinction. It's still a single-family home, it's still single-family zoned, and the buffer should still apply. Then we just leave the code as it is. If you do support that and recognize that we've got developers, he's been working on it for years, saying that it's problematic in getting multifamily constructed in infill situations. I mean, if you have a large property, which Canby has none, that's vacant for multifamily, any multifamily is going to remove existing single-family homes. There is no other multifamily in town. That's why we had to downzone industrial zone to find some out at Fred Meyer. So we took industrial zone property and made it high-density residential. So the only other places we have are the comp plan designated where you can rezone to high-density where there's existing single-family homes on the property. And that's how we're going to get our future multifamily development. So it's just a concept. How critical is it to get that other type of housing? And do we want to put any stumbling blocks in the way because this has been brought to our attention? And it could potentially be a stumbling block.
Okay. So Jeff, I'm going back to you because this was your baby.
Yeah, the stumbling block is zoning, okay? That's the stumbling block. And it's not a stumbling block, it's the law. It's what we're supposed to be doing. This is a bad idea. It's a bad idea. You know, you're violating all kinds of precepts about what a comp plan is, what zoning is. And I think if you want to solve this problem, you upzone. I mean, there's places in the city where they're single family on R2, and that'll continue, and we need to make more of those kinds of locations, but there needs to be a public process and it needs to be done. This is a bad idea.
Andre.
Yeah, I think we've heard from citizens that have come here and said, you know, we came to Canby because it's a small town feel, and then when they have properties next door that develop really close, they don't like that. So I think that would be something that I would probably side with citizens of Canby, and not kind of, I guess, be in favor of what we have now and not allow for the closer 7-foot setback.
Right.
It's 9:02, so I will just say that I agree with both of what the other commissioners, and I really do. I think that they're absolutely right. I don't think I need to explain it anymore.
Okay.
I think they're absolutely right.
Larry.
I agree with Commissioner Miller, not just because of the reasons he cited, but because of this HB 2001 Oregon single-family zoning ban was a long time coming. Sections 22-24 requirements. Section 23, cities outside metro with populations more than 10,000 and less than 25,000 shall allow the development of a duplex on each lot or parcel zoned for residential use that allow for development of detached single-family dwellings. These cities may also allow other middle housing types in these areas. So basically, they're getting rid of the single-family home zones. So if they're going to try that, you need, as far as I'm concerned, you need to do everything you can to suppress townhouses in those developments.
Well, I'm going to agree with Commissioner Mills. This is a bad idea, and we're just going to leave it at that. Okay?
All right.
So, and finally, number 4, Brian, what do you?
So I'm not quite sure I digested Gina's written testimony and voice testimony tonight on the private street issue. Because originally, I don't know, I still think what we proposed solves the primary concern and objective that we're not going to allow lots to use streets to calculate their maximum or minimum lot areas. They're just not going to be included by that solution. And having the wording in the subdivision is where you're going to have the main issue. I doubt that it's ever really going to come up in a partition, but we've got the language in that section too. If for some reason you want to make sure that we don't miss it, if we have a street with a partition, that they can't count the street area for those 3 lot partitions either.
Okay.
And so I think we're probably okay on that issue.
Ryan, you want to lead us off on this?
Yeah, I don't think I have an issue with it. I don't think I have an issue with 4 at all. I think
You're good.
I think I'm good with it.
Larry?
Might surprise you, but I like it.
Yeah, it does surprise me actually.
I think it's a good idea. I think the language looks good to me in my limited experience. If there's any language enhancements, maybe they could be discussed after the meeting or later. But I like the idea. I think the language is good.
Andre?
I would agree.
And I would agree as well. Okay, so 2 for 4 there, Brian.
Were there any other issues raised tonight from the public input that are other topics that you could tell that would make you hesitate in moving this forward to the council? Because that's kind of what I need a motion for.
I guess would like to ask a question. It does need to be moved forward. I think there's a lot of good work here that we need to not lose. I guess I've said before, I'm going to oppose the package because of this one language. If there's another way to do this where you're carrying it forward with our concerns, then I would, I'd support carrying the package forward with our concerns itemized or listed or described.
That's what I was going to ask too. Do we just need to be there at the city council meeting to
No,
explain?
I mean, that really isn't necessary because we're going to create your findings and they're going to fully indicate what you just said on these 4 items that we went through here. And you all agreed on the buffer strip item, which was, you're pretty adamant about. And so I don't think that's probably going to go anywhere because your recommendation was pretty unanimous on that.
So, I will entertain a motion to approve the changes to the Canby Land Development and Planning Ordinance Title 16, Canby Municipal Code, with the exceptions that we have discussed, which I can't articulate in great detail right now. My brain is full.
Okay. So Laney pointed out, technically, I don't,
She's going on vacation.
yeah, I don't think we didn't, I don't think I even brought my original staff report from the first hearing that probably had, I don't know if it had a motion in it or not, but we need to recognize in the motion that you're including the way it's stated on the agenda, basically, where we're also including the comprehensive plan change that's part of this package.
So do you want me to restate that?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve the staff's consideration of a legislative text amendment to streamline, clarify, and update numerous sections of the Canby Land Development and Planning Ordinance Title 16 Canby Municipal Code. The text amendment proposal edits and updates 32 chapters and the table of contents from Title 16 of the Canby Municipal Code, and also amends one specific provision of the Canby Comprehensive Plan to delete Area K of Policy Number 6 under Finding Number 1 of the Buildable Land Section TA/CPA 19-01, Development and Planning Ordinance Title 16 CMC, and Canby Comprehensive Plan Area K with the changes that the Planning Commission has discussed, which you have.
Yeah.
Does that sound?
I'd love to be able to make a motion if I could remember everything that you
Just
said.
say,
I'll just
so
say
moved,
Just
so
say
moved.
Repeat that, Commissioner Saber. I could repeat it, but then I'd probably have to have more water than is available to me right now.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So, final decisions are, I will entertain a motion to approve ANN 18-06 Southeast Township Road annexation.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We'll entertain a motion to approve TA/CPA-1901 Development and Planning Ordinance Title 16 CMC and Canby Comprehensive Plan Area K with the changes that the Planning Commission has discussed and is in the notes.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay? Okay. 5-1, 4-1. Okay.
One last comment before
Yes.
you close. Just wanted to take a moment. Staff has heard a lot of criticisms the last parts of these meetings, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands, and the public that hears this, that a lot of very hard work went into this, and it's very complex, and they've done a great job, and I want to thank them.
So noted. Items of interest from the planning staff. Looks like our next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting is Monday, July 22nd.
And I believe what we have on that agenda is something you haven't necessarily dealt with for a while, a use determination is coming before you to decide whether a use should be allowed in the M1 zone. So that'll be interesting.
That's fun.
Okay. And items of interest from the Planning Commission, the status update of HB 2001 requires the allowance of duplexes in all residential zoned areas.
So I think Laney passed out some
She did.
handouts on this, and I've got one more. This, I don't know how many I've got here. I wanted to make sure I kept one of them. I did. So here's another one you can pass out. This one here, I may be missing a word or two because I couldn't get it fit on the copy machine right tonight. That's why one page is bigger than the other, but this was in the Sunday Oregonian, so the paper. I just copied the article just in case you missed it, because it has to do with HB 2001. And it's just an interesting article, and the other thing that's will be useful is this section by section summary that came from the League of Oregon Cities. And I haven't read through this. I haven't had time to read through it all. But it's interesting that even just on the first page, the very first, under section 2-24 requirements, says a duplex on every lot or parcel zoned for residential use that allows single-family dwellings. And so staff will have to be waiting for the Department of Land Conservation and Development to promulgate administrative rules that will explain to us exactly what that means, because my mind's racing in all sorts of directions, and I'm not 100% sure until we hear exactly what some of these things mean, is that statement makes me think, how about some of these recent subdivisions that you've just approved, and we're almost ready to approve the final plat to be recorded, which will make those lots now appear once they record them. And what if the developers, prior to this bill getting passed, planned detached single-family homes? And now, all of a sudden, I could build a duplex on every one of these lots instead of a single-family home. And we didn't plan for that. I mean, it's possible, not likely, but possible, that the infrastructure already installed in the ground couldn't handle every lot being a duplex. But it probably could.
Well, I'm speaking strictly for myself.
Pretty wild.
I think I'm going to quote a famous Canby commissioner. This is a bad idea, a really bad idea. Unquote.
I've heard a couple of them say it tonight.
I guess.
And if this is an example, do we really want Canby to look like this?
No.
I do not. And so I don't know what process we go through, but this stinks.
I went through a process, I think I told Brian about this several years ago. I was a commissioner in the city of Eugene, and we went into one of our neighborhoods and put together an R1 code that allowed for courtyard homes, townhouses. And it went through the public hearing process, and I've never been in a bigger room full of more angry people than when we had to roll that out. And it ended up, and we were doing that at the direction of the Eugene City Council, and they rolled it back. I mean, and so I think that part of what has to happen here is we have to see what the DLCD says, what their intent is on some of these rules. Because some of them, if they're incorporated correctly, it'll almost be nothing. On the other hand, if it's a duplex on every lot, that's not the same. And then part of it is we have to, this is going to take time for the public to become aware of. But as they become aware of it, it'll be interesting to see how they react.
I think that the Ace Hardware store was going to run on pitchforks.
I hope so.
So I just want to go on record as saying, again, bad idea, really bad idea. And I would like to see our planning commission and city council go on record as saying it's a really bad idea. Mr. Boatright.
Yeah, I think we need a sanctuary city for single-family detached homes. Crazy.
Ryan, do you have a thought on this?
No, I don't really have too much to say at this point, because there's so much more to learn about what the impacts are going to be and such. They say in here that they put an emergency clause, and I guess this governor signed it now. I'm not even positive about that. That's all it takes is for the governor to sign it, and she said she will, and maybe she already has. I haven't been able to keep up with it. But that said, that we'll have to get clarification, but it sounds like they said the density part of it, which means they have to allow the duplexes, goes into effect immediately. Whereas some of the other aspects that are part of it doesn't go into effect until 2020, which isn't that far away.
I'm curious, I'm always curious as to, what happens when a body like this says no. I mean, what are they going to, they can fire the volunteers, but.
So I can address that a little bit. Last week, we saw advertised from the Department of Land Conservation and Development a new planner for high-level state planner whose main job is to enforce this
Come and take it.
requirement. And there's also was another bill, 2003, HB, that institutes a requirement for all cities, including the city of Canby, to create a strategic housing plan that will show how you plan to implement the requirements of HB 2001. And so it has to be approved by the state. And so there will be a whole list, and actually we're going to share with you at our hearing that I notified you about our housing needs analysis. Matilda's going to include, at least she said she was, a list of all possible housing implementation measures you could consider for your community. And there's no reason that you have to adopt any particular, but you're going to have to pick one or two or so to get the state to buy off on our housing strategic plan that's required by the legislature as well.
But again, Brian, my question is, what if we say no?
Yeah.
I mean, comes a time when these people are making really bad decisions, bad ideas.
Can't address that.
And what do you do?
I guess one difference I would make is that, we're talking about bad decisions. In this case, I'm talking about by a non-elected official. This law was passed by our representatives, and we don't like it, then we need to change our representatives. This is a political process, but it's now part of law. But I'm just saying that, this is something that we're faced with all the time. I mean, a lot of what we do involves rules and regulations which we may not personally support or we may not agree with. I mean, there's certainly things in our code that I feel responsible for that I don't agree with, but part of my job is to make sure the code is followed, okay? And where I can legally help affect it. Now, if you're talking about, a general rebellion, I don't know if I could be on board with that, but
that is not in our none of that is in our code or our comp plan, any of that. So it's not in there right now.
But there are, I guess saying that, I'm not talking about that, but I'm saying that there are other things that are already in our code that came from statewide mandate that are there, whether, and we enforce those. That's part of our job.
To the extent that there are still people watching right now, Oregon is a home rule state.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to keep Canby, and I certainly do, then the people that are watching on TV right now need to start calling their senators.
Yeah, there you go.
And their representatives. I'm not in favor of this, and I never will be, because I think it should be at this level that we make that decision and not at a Marble House in Salem. So that's my position on it. But I hope there are people watching right now that will start ringing phones down there.
Yep.
Okay. Now that we've all gone down that road. Andre, do you want to add to this at all? Because, hey, now we're all excited.
I think if citizens of Canby want to voice their opinion, they should call their elected representatives and make their opinion heard. Because it is the state level that is making this decision.
That would be Senator Alan Olson and Representative Christine Drazen. So, call them. I will. So, they're Republicans, they're in the extreme minority, so a lot of good done. Okay, I will entertain, unless there are other thoughts, I will entertain the motion to adjourn.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Let's stay. I thought we were going to hear from Larry.